At its peak, this castle ruled more than land. It ruled attention, narratives, and the imagination of an entire nation. From these walls, a single man shaped headlines, elections, and public truth itself. Power flowed effortlessly. Money followed. But power has a flaw no empire escapes. The larger it grows, the heavier it becomes. What was built to symbolize dominance slowly revealed something far more dangerous: the cost of maintaining control. This is not the story of a castle. It is the story of what happens when influence outgrows sustainability, and when an empire discovers its limits. In the rolling hills of California's central coast, where the Pacific Ocean meets the rugged terrain of San Simeon, a structure emerged that embodied the ambitions of an era defined by unchecked expansion and the illusions of boundless wealth. Hearst Castle, known to its creator as La Cuesta Encantada, the Enchanted Hill, stands as a testament to the architectural grandeur that William Randolph Hearst envisioned atop the 1,600-foot promontory his family had claimed since the mid-19th century. The land itself, originally part of a vast 40,000-acre ranch, purchased by Hearst's father, George Hearst, in 1865 from Mexican land grants following the secularization of missions, carried the weight of California's transitional history from Spanish colonial outposts to American frontier enterprises. George, a mining magnate who struck fortune in the Comstock Lode and other ventures, used the property for modest family camping trips, pitching tents on what was then called Camp Hill. It was a place of simplicity where young William, born in 1863, first absorbed the expansive vistas that would later fuel his dreams of dominion over space and legacy. By the time William inherited the land upon his mother's death in 1919, Phoebe Apperson Hearst, a philanthropist who had expanded the holdings to over 250,000 acres through careful acquisitions. The site symbolized not just familial roots, but the spatial authority of a man who had built a media empire capable of shaping public opinion across continents. The castle's architecture, a harmonious yet eclectic blend of Mediterranean revival, Spanish colonial revival, and Gothic elements, was meticulously orchestrated by Julia Morgan, California's first licensed female architect, who collaborated with Hearst from 1919 until construction halted in 1947. Morgan, trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris and known for her work on the Berkeley Women's Gymnasium, brought a disciplined precision to Hearst's lavish impulses, designing a complex that sprawled across 127 acres of terraced gardens, pools, and walkways. At its core rose Casa Grande, the main residence, a 68,500 square foot edifice inspired by the 16th century church of Santa Maria la Mayor in Ronda, Spain, with its twin bell towers piercing the sky like sentinels of authority. The facade, clad in Utah limestone and reinforced concrete to withstand earthquakes, evoked the fortified palaces of European nobility, symbolizing Hearst's self-perception as a modern feudal lord. The spatial layout asserted dominance. Guests approached via a winding 5-mile road from the coastal highway, ascending through oak-dotted hills that gradually revealed the castle's silhouette, a deliberate progression that built anticipation and underscored the isolation of power. Inside the assembly room, measuring 83 feet long, with a 30-foot Burgundian fireplace and a 16th century Italian ceiling from a palazzo in Bologna, served as the grand gathering space where Hearst hosted luminaries from Hollywood and politics, their conversations echoing beneath tapestries depicting Roman triumphs, artifacts that whispered of imperial legacies long faded. This architectural symbolism extended to the guest houses, Casa del Mar, Casa del Monte, and Casa del Sol, positioned like satellites around the main structure, each with its own thematic opulence. Casa del Sol, for instance, incorporated antique Persian tiles and Moorish patterns, evoking the Alhambra's intricate geometries and reinforcing a narrative of cultural conquest through collection. Hearst's directives to Morgan, documented in over 5,000 letters and telegrams, reveal a man obsessed with spatial harmony. He insisted on relocating ancient oaks rather than felling them, encasing their roots in concrete cradles for transplantation, a process that mirrored his broader approach to history, preserving and repurposing the past to serve his vision. The Neptune Pool, an outdoor expanse of 345,000 gallons, flanked by colonnades and a Greco-Roman temple facade reconstructed from authentic ancient marble, symbolized abundance and control over nature, its waters heated by oil burners to defy the coastal chill. Yet beneath this veneer of enchantment lay the historical atmosphere of an America in flux. The 1920s boom, fueled by Hearst's newspaper chain that dominated urban markets from New York to San Francisco, allowed for such extravagance. But the site's remoteness, 8 hours by train from Los Angeles, isolated it from the industrial realities that funded it. The airfields and private zoo, once home to zebras, giraffes, and elephants roaming the grounds, further amplified this aura of otherworldly authority, where wild beasts and celebrity guests alike orbited Hearst's domain. As construction progressed through the 1920s, the castle became a living archive of global history, with over 25,000 artifacts integrated into its fabric. Egyptian statuary from the Ptolemaic era, Greek vases forming one of the world's largest private collections, and Renaissance ceilings dismantled from Italian monasteries and reassembled beam by beam. This layering created an immersive historical atmosphere, where walking the halls meant traversing centuries. A 14th century Spanish ceiling in Hearst's Gothic suite, adorned with carved wooden bosses depicting saints and kings, hung above beds once owned by cardinals, evoking the ecclesiastical power structures of medieval Europe. Spatial authority was palpable in the refectory, a dining hall lined with Gothic choir stalls from a Catalan cathedral and banners fluttering from the rafters, where Hearst dined with figures like Winston Churchill and Charlie Chaplin, the long table enforcing a hierarchical seating that placed him at the center. The Roman pool, an indoor natatorium tiled in Venetian glass mosaics mimicking ancient Pompeian designs, added to the sensory immersion, its blue depths reflecting the fusion of classical antiquity with modern engineering, including an early underwater lighting system. Yet this grandeur was not without its undercurrents. The castle's design, with hidden service corridors for staff and a private telephone exchange connecting 80 lines, maintained an illusion of effortless opulence, masking the labor of up to 150 workers quarrying stone on site and desalinating ocean sand for concrete. The Enchanted Hills rise coincided with the zenith of Hearst's media influence, where his chain of nearly 30 newspapers and magazines commanded a daily readership of 20 million, shaping narratives on everything from the Spanish-American War to Prohibition. This spatial expansion in print mirrored the physical one at San Simeon, both rooted in a belief in limitless growth. However, as the 1930s dawned, the historical atmosphere shifted. The Great Depression exposed the fragility of such empires, with Hearst's expenditures on the castle estimated at under $10 million for construction alone, including $2.987 million for Casa Grande and $1.23 million for pools and terraces, contributing to a mounting debt that would force reevaluations. The site's symbolism evolved from triumph to cautionary tale, its towers standing as markers of an era when American tycoons sought to etch their authority into the landscape, only to confront the inexorable limits of finance and time. The financial underpinnings of Hearst Castle trace back to the vast fortunes amassed through mining and media, yet they revealed the precarious balance between accumulation and expenditure that defined William Randolph Hearst's life. George Hearst's initial acquisition of the Piedra Blanca Rancho in 1865 for $30,000, a sum derived from his stakes in the Ophir mine and other Nevada silver operations, laid the groundwork for a family estate that expanded exponentially under Phoebe Hearst's stewardship after George's death in 1891. Phoebe, leveraging dividends from the Homestake mine in South Dakota and Anaconda, copper in Montana, invested in additional parcels, transforming the ranch into a self-sustaining domain with cattle herds and orchards that generated modest revenues. By 1919, when William assumed control, the property's value had appreciated amid California's land boom, but it was his media empire, initiated with the San Francisco Examiner in 1887, gifted by his father, that provided the liquidity for transformation. The Examiner's sensationalist journalism, pioneering yellow journalism tactics like bold headlines and lurid illustrations, boosted circulation from 15,000 to over 55,000 by 1890, yielding profits that Hearst reinvested into acquisitions such as the New York Journal in 1895 for $180,000. This pattern of leveraging media revenues for expansion mirrored the castle's construction, where initial site preparations in 1919 cost $500,000, including road building and water systems piped from Mountain Springs 12 miles away, all funded by newspaper syndicates that by the 1920s generated annual incomes exceeding $10 million. Hearst's approach to building his empire intertwined media dominance with personal aggrandizement, creating a feedback loop where public influence translated into private splendor. The acquisition of art and antiquities for San Simeon, sourced through dealers like Arthur Bine in Spain and Joseph Duveen in London, exemplified this. Between 1921 and 1935, Hearst spent over $50 million on collections, including $1 million for the Pergamon altar fragments, later resold, and $300,000 for a single Raphael painting. These purchases, often financed through loans against his media holdings, were shipped across oceans in crates that filled warehouses in the Bronx and San Francisco before integration into the castle's design. Julia Morgan's blueprints, archived at the California Polytechnic State University, detail how spaces were adapted around these artifacts. The celestial suites expanded to house 17th-century French tapestries depicting the life of Alexander the Great, symbolizing conquest parallel to Hearst's media takeovers. The financial strain began to manifest in the late 1920s. The stock market crash of 1929 eroded the value of Hearst's diversified investments, including real estate in Mexico and timberlands in Oregon, which had previously buffered extravagances. Newspaper revenues dipped as advertisers pulled back, with the Hearst chain's debt climbing to $126 million by 1935, partly attributable to the $3 million annual operating costs at San Simeon, encompassing salaries for gardeners, zookeepers, and a full-time projectionist for the private theater screening unreleased films from his cosmopolitan productions. Interconnected themes of ambition and overreach emerged as Hearst's media practices fueled both his rise and eventual constraints. His campaigns against perceived enemies, such as the 1898 push for war with Spain through fabricated stories in the Journal, inflated circulations to 1.5 million daily, generating ad revenues that directly supported early castle phases like the Esplanade's construction in 1922 for $750,000. Yet this sensationalism bred backlash. Antitrust scrutiny from the Federal Trade Commission in the 1920s investigated his monopolistic control over newsprint supplies, acquired through Canadian mills purchased for $20 million in 1919, which strained cash flows as pulp prices fluctuated. At San Simeon, the human element softened the narrative. Workers, many immigrants from Italy and Mexico, labored under foreman Camille Rossi, crafting terracotta roofs and marble facades, their efforts documented in payroll records showing weekly wages of $4 per day amid the opulence they built. Guests like Amelia Earhart and Cary Grant, arriving by private plane to the castle's airstrip completed in 1924, experienced this immersion, dining on meals prepared in a kitchen equipped with industrial refrigerators imported from Germany, while Hearst manages empire via teletype machines, relaying stock quotes and editorial directives. The castle's hidden costs extended beyond finances to the social fabric of Hearst's world, where media power insulated him from immediate repercussions but amplified long-term vulnerabilities. Phoebe Hearst's philanthropic legacy, including funding for the University of California buildings designed by Morgan, contrasted with William's profligacy. Her estate, valued at $20 million upon her 1919 death, was partially liquidated to settle inheritance taxes, leaving William with liquid assets of $7 million that he swiftly directed towards San Simeon's initial $2 million outlay for foundations and guest houses. By the mid-1930s, as the Depression deepened, Hearst's refusal to curtail spending, continuing to import Egyptian sarcophagi and Roman sarcina, even as his papers laid off staff, led to a liquidity crisis. Bankers from the Chase National Bank, holding $30 million in loans secured against his art collection, pressured for austerity, resulting in the 1937 suspension of construction after 28 years and expenditures totaling $10 million, excluding art. This pause reflected broader limits on American media empires. Competitors like Joseph Pulitzer's World had collapsed under similar debts in the 1890s, a fate Hearst narrowly avoided through asset sales, including $800,000 from auctioning lesser antiquities at Gimbel's department store in 1941. The inexorable pressures of the Great Depression reshaped the trajectory of Hearst Castle, transforming it from a symbol of unbridled aspiration into a stark reminder of the finite boundaries encircling even the most formidable American fortunes. By 1937, as construction ground to a halt amid unfinished wings and half-completed pergolas, William Randolph Hearst faced a confluence of debts that totaled $87 million across his enterprises, with San Simeon's maintenance alone devouring $500,000 annually in utilities, staffing, and animal feed for the lingering menagerie. The media empire, once a powerhouse with 28 daily newspapers, 13 magazines, and radio stations reaching 30% of the U.S. population, began to fracture under the weight of reduced advertising revenues, down 40% from 1929 peaks, and boycotts from progressive groups decrying Hearst's anti-New Deal editorials that labeled Franklin Roosevelt a communist sympathizer. These political stances, amplified through chains like the Chicago Herald-Examiner and the Los Angeles Examiner, alienated readers and sponsors, exacerbating cash shortages that forced the sale of prized assets. In 1938, Hearst liquidated $1.2 million in bonds from his mother's estate trust to cover immediate loans, while auction houses dispersed lesser artworks, including a collection of Greek vases fetched for $250,000 at Park Bernay Galleries. The castle's opulent halls, once alive with weekend gatherings of 50 guests transported by private rail cars from Glendale Station, grew quieter, the Neptune pool's waters still reflecting the unchanged facade, but now underscoring an atmosphere of suspended ambition. Interwoven with this decline were the personal tolls on those orbiting Hearst's world, where the humanistic elements of loyalty and endurance came into sharper focus amid financial unraveling. Marion Davies, Hearst's longtime companion and a silent film star, whose career he bolstered through Cosmopolitan Productions at a cost of $7 million in the 1920s, resided in the Della Robbia room during visits, its walls lined with 16th-century Italian majolica plates symbolizing fragile beauty. As debts mounted, Davies pawned her jewelry collection for $1 million in 1935 to aid Hearst, a gesture documented in her memoir that highlighted the intimate sacrifices behind the public facade. Staff reductions at San Simeon, from a peak of 50 full-time employees, including chefs trained in French cuisine and gardeners tending 23,000 rose bushes, dwindled to a skeleton crew by 1940, with payroll records showing cuts that mirrored layoffs across Hearst's newsrooms. Over 2,000 journalists dismissed between 1930 and 1935 as papers consolidated editions. Julia Morgan, having overseen 28 years of blueprints evolving from initial sketches on butcher paper to detailed elevations incorporating seismic reinforcements post the 1925 Santa Barbara earthquake, retired from the project in 1947, her correspondence revealing a quiet concern for the site's future viability. The castle's isolation, once a deliberate assertion of authority, now amplified its vulnerability. Supply deliveries via coastal barges became erratic as fuel costs rose, and the private zoo's animals were gradually relocated to public institutions like the San Diego Zoo in 1937, dispersing giraffes and zebras that had roamed freely since 1923. Cause and effect chains linked Hearst's media strategies directly to these financial limits, illustrating how aggressive expansion bred inherent instability in American conglomerates of the era. The 1906 acquisition of the Boston American for $400,000, funded by Examiner profits, exemplified early overleveraging, a pattern repeated in the 1920s with the purchase of the Atlanta Georgian for $500,000 and the launch of the New York Mirror in 1924 at a startup cost of $2 million. These moves, while boosting national reach, inflated operational expenses. Newsprint alone cost $15 million yearly by 1928, leaving little buffer when economic downturns hit. Antitrust actions, such as the 1934 lawsuit by the Department of Justice alleging monopolistic practices in radio broadcasting, drained resources further, with legal fees amounting to $300,000. At San Simeon, this translated to deferred maintenance. The Roman pool's gold-flecked tiles, imported from Murano at $50,000, began to show wear without funds for restoration, their luster dimming as a metaphor for the empire's fading glory. Hearst's relocation to Wintun, his Northern California estate, in 1941 marked a retreat, leaving the castle under caretaker oversight, its 165 rooms housing only echoes of past revelries, where figures like Clark Gable and David Niven had mingled under chandeliers from Venetian palazzos. The handover of Hearst Castle to the state of California in 1957, 6 years after Hearst's death at age 88 from a cerebral hemorrhage, encapsulated the ultimate concession to financial and temporal limits. Valued at $60 million including contents, the property was donated by the Hearst Corporation, restructured in 1937 under court-ordered receivership that stripped William of direct control, to preserve it as a public monument, with the family retaining mineral rights to surrounding lands. This transition, formalized through deeds filed in San Luis Obispo County, reflected broader shifts in media empires. The corporation's diversification into television and magazines post-World War II stabilized finances, but at the cost of the founder's personal vision. Tours commencing in 1958 revealed the site's layered history to visitors, from the assembly room's Persian rugs woven in the 17th century to the library's 4,000 volumes bound in Moroccan leather, each artifact a thread in the narrative of acquisition and loss. Yet the hidden costs lingered in the collective memory. The displacement of local Pachacho tribe descendants from ancestral lands during initial ranch expansions, and the environmental toll of diverting Pine Mountain Springs, which reduced downstream flows for coastal farms. These elements wove a humanistic tapestry where the castle stood not as an endpoint of triumph, but as a contemplative space on the perils of overreach. In the decades following William Randolph Hearst's death in 1951, the castle at San Simeon transitioned from a private enclave of excess to a public repository of history, its halls now echoing with the footsteps of over 1 million annual visitors who traverse the same winding road that once led dignitaries to its gates. The Hearst Corporation's donation to the California State Park System in 1957, encompassing 56 miles of coastline and the core 127-acre estate, was formalized through legislative acts that designated it as the Hearst San Simeon State Historical Monument, with an initial endowment of $100,000 for upkeep. This shift preserved the architectural integrity, Casa Grande's towers still silhouetted against the Pacific horizon, but exposed the hidden costs in new light. Maintenance expenses ballooned to $2 million yearly by the 1970s, funded by taxpayer dollars and admission fees, revealing how private extravagance could burden public resources long after the founder's passing. The site's integration into the national consciousness, through documentaries and books chronicling its construction, underscored interconnected themes of legacy and limitation, where the media empire's remnants, the corporation's evolution into a diversified conglomerate with holdings in ESPN and A&E networks, continued to thrive, generating $11 billion in revenue by the 2010s, far eclipsing the debts that once threatened collapse. Humanistic threads persisted in the stories of those who shaped and sustained the castle, their contributions forming a quieter counterpoint to Hearst's grand narrative. Julia Morgan's legacy, honored posthumously with the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal in 2014 as the first woman recipient, highlighted her role in navigating the project's fiscal turbulence. Her firm billed $1.2 million over 28 years, with itemized invoices for travel from her San Francisco office to the remote site, often by overnight train. Descendants of the workforce, including families of stonemasons who quarried local limestone, contributed oral histories archived at the Hearst Castle Visitor Center, recounting the camaraderie amid grueling labor. Shifts extending 10 hours in the coastal fog, with safety nets absent until post-1929 regulations. Marion Davies' later years, marked by her 1951 marriage to Horace Brown after Hearst's death, and her philanthropy through the Children's Clinic in Los Angeles, funded by $1.7 million from her estate, illustrated personal resilience amid the empire's financial shadows. The castle's artifacts, many repatriated or loaned to museums like the Los Angeles County Museum of Art in the 1950s, dispersed elements of Hearst's collection, such as the $500,000 spent on Spanish ceilings now displayed elsewhere, demonstrating how overaccumulation led to fragmentation, a cause and effect that mirrored the syndication and sale of Hearst newspapers in the post-war era. Broader reflections on American media empires emerged as San Simeon's story intersected with contemporary parallels, where the limits of unchecked growth remained evident in successors like Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, which faced its own debt crises in the 1990s after aggressive expansions echoing Hearst's tactics. The castle's environmental footprint, including the diversion of 200,000 gallons daily from local aquifers that strained ecosystems documented in 1960s, geological surveys by the U.S. Geological Service prompted conservation efforts. Reforestation programs planted 10,000 trees in the 1980s to mitigate erosion from terracing, a remedial action highlighting the long-term ecological costs of spatial ambition. Politically, Hearst's influence waned but left imprints. His anti-communist crusades in the 1930s, which cost $5 million in lost ad revenue from boycotts, prefigured media polarization seen in later conglomerates, with the Hearst chain's consolidation reducing titles from 28 to 15 by 1960 under corporate restructuring. Visitors today, guided through the refectory where Hearst once enforced simple condiments like ketchup to ground his guests in humility amid luxury, experience this duality. An immersive reminder that empires, whether built of stone or ink, confront inevitable boundaries. The hidden costs extended to cultural reckonings as scholars in the late 20th century reevaluated Hearst's acquisitions amid growing awareness of provenance. Artifacts like the 3rd century BC Greek statues in the gardens, purchased for $100,000 from European dealers displaced by World War I, raised questions of ethical collecting, leading to inventories in the 1990s that confirmed no looted items but emphasized the power imbalances in global art markets. Financially, the corporation's recovery through diversification, selling off radio stations for $20 million in the 1940s and investing in television, illustrated adaptability. Yet San Simeon's $50 million restoration in the 2000s after the 2003 San Simeon earthquake reinforced the ongoing economic demands of preservation. In this way, the Enchanted Hill endures as a humanistic chronicle, its vistas unchanged since George Hearst's 1865 purchase, offering a calm contemplation on the American dream's expanse and its inherent constraints, where media moguls' visions rise spectacularly only to meet the horizon of reality.